Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to unpack what is widely considered the absolute biggest fraud in India's corporate history. And to really understand the impact of this scam, we're going to walk chronologically through the sudden, catastrophic unraveling of a company that was, honestly, the undisputed blue-eyed boy of the Indian Stock Exchange.
It is with deep regret and tremendous burden that I am carrying on my conscience. That is exactly how B. Ramalinga Raju, the highly revered founder of Satyam Computer Services, began an absolute bombshell of a confession letter on January 7, 2009. With those exact words, he instantly destroyed a titan of the Indian IT industry and sent these massive shockwaves ripping through the global financial system. But, we really have to ask, how did we even get to that letter?
Section 1. The Blue-Eyed Boy and the Elite Board. Now, to truly grasp the sheer shock of this collapse, we have to look at just how high Satyam was flying before the fall. I mean, they weren't just some successful company. They were the pioneers who had literally shaped India's outsourcing industry since the late 80s.
53,000. That's the number of employees Satyam had on its payroll. These people were spread across 60 different countries, handling highly sensitive back-office and consulting operations for massive global clients. We're talking General Electric, Nestle, Qantas Airways. Actually, to put that massive scale into perspective for a second, if you combine the entire workforce of Tata Steel, which was around 30,000, and Tata Motors at about 23,000, you get Satyam. They were an absolute behemoth in the corporate world, officially reporting billions in revenue.
And what made Satyam seem even more bulletproof was its board of independent directors. Look at these names. This roster was packed with the absolute heavyweights of academia, government, and tech. You have a former Indian cabinet secretary, highly esteemed Harvard advisors, deans of top business schools. This specific lineup lent Satyam a level of credibility that was basically untouchable.
So the crucial question we have to ask is this: how did some of the most highly educated, experienced people in the world completely miss a fraud amounting to over 7,000 crores? To answer that, let's trace the exact chronological sequence of the downfall.
Section 2. The Mitas Blunder, the crack in the ice. Let's fast forward to December 2008 and see how this perfect illusion began to fracture. Everything seemed totally fine on the surface, but underneath, funds were allegedly being diverted into real estate. And that is exactly when management made a fatal miscalculation. The inciting incident was this highly controversial move. Management attempted a massive $1.6 billion buyout of two real estate firms called Mitas, which, get this, is literally just Satyam spelled backwards. But crucially, these firms were owned by the founder's own sons. Investors immediately saw this for what it was: a blatant siphoning of IT cash into family-owned real estate. It sparked an instant, aggressive shareholder rebellion. The deal was quickly scrapped, but you know what? The damage was already done.
Section 3. A timeline of collapse. What followed was a rapid 3-week freefall that completely, utterly unraveled the company. Let's look at this timeline day by day, because the speed of this collapse is just breathtaking. Watch how fast this cascades. On December 15th, the share price was at a healthy $226.5. The very next day, the Mitas deal is proposed, and shares absolutely plummet. By the 18th, desperate to prop up the falling stock, founder Ramalinga Raju promises a $1.2 billion share buyback using company cash that, well, we later learned didn't even exist. Then, in an unrelated but devastating blow, on December 23rd, the World Bank debars Satyam for 8 years over alleged data theft. By Christmas Day, Dr. Mangalam Srinivasan, one of those elite independent directors, resigns, taking moral responsibility for initially approving that disastrous Mitas deal.
And the bleeding doesn't stop there. On December 28th, the investment bank DSP Merrill Lynch is brought in to find a buyer. The very next day, 3 more independent directors jump ship. By January 3rd, Raju's personal stake in the company plummets to just over 5%, mainly because institutional lenders start selling off shares he had pledged for loans. But the tension truly peaks on January 6th. DSP Merrill Lynch suddenly walks out of their assignment after just 1 week. They cite glaring material irregularities in Satyam's books.
Section 4. The 7,000 crore confession. That sudden walkout by the investment bank effectively cornered the founder. He had nowhere left to hide. And this leads directly to the climax of our timeline on January 7, 2009. Raju releases his confession, and guys, the numbers are absolutely jaw-dropping.
Look at the staggering gap here between the fiction Satyam reported and the grim reality of their actual finances. They claimed to have over 5,000 crores in cash and bank balances. It was entirely fake. For Q2 of 2008, they reported 2,700 crores in revenue when it was actually just over 2,100. They claimed an operating margin of 24%, when in reality, it was a dismal 3%.
In his letter, Raju confessed that the fraud wasn't some sudden, massive heist. It was a snowballing lie. He wrote, "What started as a marginal gap between actual operating profit and the one reflected in the books attained unmanageable proportions." He famously described it as riding a tiger, not knowing how to get off without being eaten.
Section 5. Impact and Unanswered Questions. The fallout from this single letter sent a massive shockwave through the global financial system. The consequences were immediate, they were severe, and they were deeply felt across multiple continents.
90%. That is how much Satyam's ADR stocks crashed almost overnight. Institutional investors, retail investors, pensioners, massive amounts of wealth were completely wiped out in the blink of an eye.
And the human and legal impact was immense. 53,000 innocent workers, the silent majority who had absolutely nothing to do with this, were suddenly left terrified for their livelihoods. U.S. investors immediately filed class action lawsuits. India's Serious Fraud Investigation Office launched a massive probe. Very quickly, founder Raju, his brother, and the CFO were hauled into custody, and the government had to step in to entirely disband and replace the discredited board.
But right while the arrests were being made, a huge, uncomfortable question remained regarding the auditors. Remember DSP Merrill Lynch? They spotted material irregularities in just a few days. So how did the statutory auditors miss 5,000 crores of non-existent cash over several years? Did they just not physically verify bank certificates? Were fake fixed deposit receipts produced and just accepted blindly?
What makes this even more baffling to accounting professionals is the nature of the business itself. Since an IT company like Satyam doesn't have complex physical inventory or machinery to procure or complicated manufacturing supply chains, the scope for creative accounting is actually quite limited. Most income just comes through overseas billing via official banking routes. So the sheer audacity of forging this much cash in a clean-cut IT business was entirely unprecedented.
This catastrophic failure of oversight really echoes a dark pattern in the Indian financial markets: our failure to learn. Just as the Ketan Parikh scam occurred a decade after Harsh Mehta exposed systemic loopholes, Satyam proved that corporate watchdogs were, unfortunately, still asleep at the wheel. History was merely repeating itself.
Which brings us to today. The Satyam collapse forced a massive reckoning regarding the true role of independent directors and the rigors of corporate auditing. But I want to leave you with this final thought to consider as we wrap up this explainer. Look at the fragility of corporate governance. When charismatic founders and elite boards are involved, have we truly built this systemic resilience to ensure another Satyam never happens again? Or are we just waiting for the next tiger to grow out of control?